for another episode of DU Real. Jackie, it is good to be here with you. How's your Friday? How's your Friday going? I know I just asked you, but I would like everyone else to also know how you're doing.
Yes, my on the record statement of my morning. My morning has been great. I slept in because I needed a little extra rest after the big night I had last night. I made myself some delicious breakfast, had some avocado toast, some fruit, and some eggs. I got my coffee, chugging water as well. And I'm just excited to chat and see where this takes us. How are
Well,
you, Amanda?
I am also enjoying quite a little bit of extra water this morning. We went to the terminal last night for some karaoke and a few drinks and a couple of shots of tequila. And, I also slept in a little bit this morning. And so take it easy. But even though I slept in, it feels like I've gotten so much done since I've been awake and was able to take care of a couple of things on a couple of different to-do lists. And so I feel in much better shape. Like the morning and myself feel like it's in much better shape than I was expecting because I had a lot of fun. And I'm so glad that you also had a lot of fun last night.
Kicking ass and taking names despite the tequila shots. Yep. Love to hear it.
That's right. Tequila power. Um, but
True.
but I was also, I have learned the hard way with tequila shots and all the other shots. You know, having a little bit of space in between them, right? Because it's not necessarily the tequila shot by itself that does so much damage. Like the worst impact that I've experienced is when they're like stacked on each other and there's no space in between them. And I thought that that was so I thought that was a little funny because it reminded me of life. And like sometimes, it isn't, one choice necessarily that will have a big impact, but it might be that same choice stacked on itself. And it has such a bigger influence. Like if it was for me, like a sweet tooth, it's not the one cookie, it's the one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And then it's like, oh, snap, like that was a lot of sugar, like I didn't necessarily need to eat 20 cookies in a row. Um, but I thought that was so funny how not sometimes it's not the one choice, it's that one, but it's that one choice amplified and stacked on each other that has such a punch to it. And so I
Mm.
remembered that, and I was just putting some space, having some water, having beer, and having some space in between the shots. And I barely feel them this morning. I was like, this is great. You can tell this is not our first day on the job, people.
Oh, yeah. I remember my first night going out in college, and I went out with one of my friends that I knew from high school, and she just lined up probably 4 shots in front of me.
Oh my goodness.
That was a horrible night. It was a horrible night. It would go down in history.
Mhm.
Like threw up and then got directly into an Uber the next morning, just the worst.
Yep.
But I love that insight though of it really does apply to anything. Like drinking is just a small example, but it could be like you said with anything, overeating, it could be your social media usage. It could be even weed cuz
Mhm.
I've found that I've struggled with my relationship with weed. It's not the weed itself. It's how you attach to it in a way and the feeling that it gives you, and then you can kind of just like overinvest in something. um and so I think though it's interesting, there's kind of like a self-correcting process or like a bumper system that kind of happens because you have to have those experiences of going too far to understand what that's like, and you suffer the consequences. Like you said, you get that big punch and you're like, I don't really want to get punched in the freaking face anymore. I'm actually okay. Um, just slowing down, having a glass of water, you know, just being okay with where I'm at right now. And I think that's what it comes down to is that the more just okay with yourself you are at any given moment, and the more that you understand that you don't need anything to make you feel better, and that nothing actually externally from you will actually make you feel better in a way that's permanent or that meaningful, then you're able to find moderation with things a lot more, and you're able to like maintain this space around yourself where you're like, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need a substance, I don't need a person, I don't need these addictions. And then, you know, you don't have to beat yourself up for falling into them because it happens, but that's how you learn. But it's been cool to find that space and be comfortable in that space more so as I've gotten older. It's been fun to witness for sure.
Oh yeah, it's been very interesting just to notice the ways in which we cope, because it's not always something physical. You know, it's sometimes it's just the decision to not jump in, right? And then you stack that and you don't jump in over and over. And you have all these times where you are invited to go out with friends, a neighbor says hello, your mailman tries to, you know, mail person tries to start a conversation with you when they're delivering a particularly heavy package just to break the ice because they feel like they delivered it awkwardly. It was heavy. And they're like, oh, you know, you can tell I don't go to the gym, right? And you're like, staring at them, you know, like, you don't jump in, you don't jump into any, you know, like even that decision to not jump in isn't something physical, but it's something that you could stack and you could judge yourself for. But but doing it once, you're like, you're gonna do that every once in a while. You're gonna have that cookie, you're gonna have that drink, you're gonna have that shot, you're gonna not jump in. And it's at least being space for yourself not to judge that one choice will let you, you know, just maybe digest it or consider another choice or just give room to savor that choice. If it is that shot, if it is that cookie, you're like, oh my goodness, this is, you know what, instead of a shot, could I get that? Could I get that tequila on the rocks? I'm going to sip it, right? And you just, you know, you change the experience. And I was chatting, you know, this with Andrew about just the experience of doing things instead of it being convenient, and how you would like it to almost like elongate it. So like if you're making coffee, you know, instead of doing that, you could make a cold brew, go through this whole process of making like a cold brew from scratch, which I don't know. But I imagine it would be a little bit longer than just filling up a coffee pot, filling the filter with the ground up beans and putting the water and pressing the button and walking away, or using a French press. Or instead of having a shot, putting it in a cup and with, you know, on the rocks with an ice or no, you know, I forget what the term would be if it's not on the rocks, but either way, just sipping it slowly and enjoying the flavors, and maybe sometimes pairing it with a delicious, you know, joint, you know, of a similar, you know, the other day we had lit our joints with like this cherry, was it cherry wood? It was a certain type of wood, and it burns fast and it burns hot, but the flavor of the wood added to the flavor of the joint, and it was just like lighting a cigar. And I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. But you had to light the wood with the lighter, and then the lighter, then the piece of wood, you had to light the joint. And so you had to go through this little process. But it was fantastic being able to like elongate the process. So it's like when you're gonna have a shot, consider just drinking it slowly. If you're thinking about having that cookie, consider just savoring every single bite. Because maybe if we experience one choice more fully, we'd be less likely to stack it, trying to reach this like ultimate experience. Um, you know, maybe it's a lot closer than we think.
I love that, of taking the time to savor it. But you can't savor things if you're judging yourself for it. And I think that's where we get in this vicious loop of need, like, you kind of have this cognitive dissonance about whatever it is that you're using to escape or like try and chase a high. Um, like with drinking, I guess you you have like shame about it, but then when you're drinking, you're like, you kind of go all in and you take it overboard because like it feels shameful, so you don't want to sit there and like sip your drink slowly, or you'll like, maybe you'll do it in private or nobody sees you or whatever, because you know it's an issue and you know that you're over investing in it. And that feeling of shame creates this anxiety that then you want to escape from with the same thing that you feel shame about. And it becomes this vicious cycle where you just dig yourself deeper and deeper, trying to chase this escape or this high that this thing that you've decided, this thing can give you. But that's a bottomless pit, because the only real peace and satisfaction you can feel is within yourself and without looking externally for things. Because your bar can always get higher, right? Like once you get used to, drinking a certain amount, it doesn't affect you the same way. So then you have to take it another step further to get that same high. And that can lead you down to some really dark places. But it could be the same with really anything in life, because you're avoiding responsibility and avoiding just sitting with yourself. And when you just realize that, and you could take a second to just take a step back, you do find the pleasure again in, you know, having a drink, because you have the space and the context to actually appreciate it. Or like with me and weed, I barely smoked for the whole month of May. Like I really just took a break. And now recently when I've been smoking, I'm noticing the differences more in the strains and like the flavors and the effects, like whether it's more like mentally active versus like more body relaxation. And like I'm enjoying what I'm doing when I'm high more than when I was doing it as a way of escaping. Because then after I would smoke, like back when I was in that cycle, I would feel guilty about it. And then I would dissociate in other ways. So whether that be like going on my phone or like, I don't know, just doing other unhealthy habits. Um, yeah, so it's just that space. And it's nice to be able to actually appreciate things for what they are, but you have to slow down and take your time. And I feel like we're all just trying to get somewhere so quickly. That's like a theme, and it applies to little things like that as well as like the larger picture of like what's going on in our lives. Like we want things to happen faster because we're not okay with what our life looks like right now.
Hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. It's interesting to watch ourselves. We're rushing towards like this place where we think we're not going to be anxious anymore, we're not going to be nervous, and it's like, when especially when you're using alcohol to get to that place, it's like, oh, I'm just going to drink until I get drunk and then I won't care. And it's like, yeah, but you will care when you see, videos, or you hear stories about what you did when you were drunk, when you didn't care and you didn't have any sensitivity and you had no way to pay attention because you basically handicapped yourself by, putting on this drunk blindfold. And I've been there, and it's just like, because I was either, I was trying to prove something to myself, really, and thinking that like I needed to be cooler, and cooler people were people who would drink a lot, or cooler people were people who didn't feel nervous, who were always, having a good time and were the life of the party. And so, I'm rushing to reach this finish line, and I'm not even paying attention to the race. I'm not even paying attention to each step as I'm taking it, and I'm trying to pick up speed while not paying attention to each step. And I'm like, this is madness. Right. And so even when you are quote unquote at the bar, you're like, we're going to treat this like a jazz club. We're going to sit down. We are going to do our thing. And it's so funny because sometimes, people will react in a couple of different ways. Like sometimes you'll be doing your thing and they'll look at you and they're like, yeah, fuck yeah. Or sometimes they're like, what is happening? But ultimately, their reaction isn't my priority. My priority is the experience that I'm having. And, I'm going out, I'm spending my time, I'm spending my money, I'm spending my life. And so my priority is for me to have a good time. And so when we were at the terminal yesterday, we're playing, we're singing karaoke, and I don't think that anyone can really hear me because sometimes the mic feels like it gets great amplification, and sometimes it feels like it doesn't. And I'm just like, well, if no one can hear me, I'm going to be up here jamming and singing for myself, and just having a great time, because the response is gonna may happen in a few different ways, but your experience is only going to be experienced one way with you in it. And so, I'd rather make that the priority, instead of being worried about someone else's reaction. And one that comes to mind is when we were having our tequila shots. We had asked for salt. I like the salt and the lime and the tequila. And I was like, yes. And the bartender was like, oh, everybody starts with training wheels at first, because we needed the salt and the lime. And I was like, yeah, that was me. I asked for the salt. Like, like there's no shame in my game. But it does, not only does it quote unquote help you in, drink the tequila, it enhances the flavor. And so here is someone who it's their job to sell you alcohol and encourage you to enjoy it however you want to enjoy it. But instead, he's like, I'm a man, and men don't, we don't take our shots with salt. And but then I'm like, damn, like, and he looked a little older. I was like, wow, like you're still measuring yourself up to this bar. And if you have salt with a shot, your manhood is in question. Jesus. Like, that is so fragile. And he's not making space to enjoy the experience of enhancing flavors. That's what I love about chefs, right? Because what I appreciate about them is that they're able to think about all these different flavors and how certain flavors can be layered on each other. And some can, you know, just enhance each other, and some can take away from each other, some can conflict. And the mastery of like layering flavors, I think, is so cool. And you can do that with drinks. Mixologists perfectly do that. And it's just so funny that someone who is around, who is living with the same amount of potential as me is like, I got to see one example of funneling your experience through a preference that you think is yours, and how that limits you and how that sucks. Because I'm like, damn, what do you eat? Like, is, like why? I don't know. It just felt like, I didn't, nobody said anything back to him. We were just like, like, we wanted the salt, we took our shot, we went on our way, we had a great time. But it was just so funny just to watch that happen in real time, and how, someone in that moment just let me see another side of the way that I do that. Where I just tell myself that I have to be one type of way, and because I have to be one type of person, that's going to do that one type of way. So it's just so limiting and unnecessary.
It's really clear too, like how absurd and annoying that is when it's somebody else, kind of, you're like, okay, dude, whatever, shut up. Like, if it's not something that you judge yourself for, it's kind of just like, oh, that's kind of sad that you hold yourself to these bars, and obviously you're judging yourself, and he's probably ripping tequila shots and being like about to throw up cuz just out of pride. Um but yeah, it's a little sneakier when we do it to ourselves, because we're just so convinced that we know the right way to be, the right, you know, decisions to make. And that's never the case. And there's a lot more just peace and excitement and appreciation for the experience of doing things when you're not focused on whether what you're doing is the right thing. Um, it's really not about what you're doing, it's about how you're doing it and what your relationship to that experience is. And like, if you're having a drink to savor the flavors and to savor to be in the experience of how it feels, that's a lot different than taking a shot. to be cool, you know? Like it really just sucks all the life and the experience out of whatever you're doing because you're so in your head. Um, but yeah, great question here from Jazz. How can you tell if you're doing something to escape or out of genuine appreciation for it? That is a great question. And I think there's not clearly one way or the other. Um, but I think it's just about being honest with yourself. And I think a lot of things start with a genuine appreciation. And then that appreciation can become a little bit of a dependency because you're like, oh, I want to feel like that again. And like, for example, with my relationship with weed, I love weed. I love, smoking and how it makes me feel open and creative and enhances the sensory experience. So that is a genuine appreciation. But time and place, really. Like, do I need to be waking up and immediately hitting the bong? No. And I noticed the consequences of that as well because it would kind of like put me into this weird dissociative state or cause me to avoid like the tasks that I had originally set out to do that day. And so I think that's kind of how you can tell um, if you do kind of feel guilty about it, or it's like there's consequences to what you're doing and you're still knowingly repeating that cycle. But it can be tricky, and I don't think things are like either an escape mechanism or something you genuinely appreciate. It's once again, it's not about the thing itself, it's about your relationship to it and how you're using it. And it really is just like it's very personal because one person can be using a substance or a coping mechanism in the same way as another person, but for one person it might be unhealthy, for the other person they can handle that level. So you just have to be honest with yourself. Am I leaning on this too much? And you can feel that. And yeah, and then for me also what helps is when I remove that and then I notice, oh, I feel so much better. Like, wow, I feel like more faith in myself. Like I feel more sure within myself, and connected to myself. So I think that's helpful too. It's like taking some space and then you get some more perspective. It can be more difficult to tell when you're like in the middle of the cycle.
Yeah, I like that how you broke that down where it's, it's not black or white. It very much is a case by case basis, moments by moments basis, right? Because what may be healthy for one person at one moment may be not the best thing for them in another, right? So like smoking in the morning, when I was working, two jobs, it was like I smoked very little, because it's just like I had different priorities. But then when I went back to working one job, or working overnight, and I was just working an overnight job, oh my goodness, I was definitely smoking 24/7, right? Because I was working overnight at a gas station, and it was great. And it's going to college, and it fit my life and my priorities at that time. And I was able to smoke all the time and still was productive and kicking butt and doing things, and that worked for me. But even I kind of just noticed myself reaching for it less. And it's not like I had made a decision like, that's it, we're working our two jobs, we're super serious now, super serious people, don't smoke any drugs. It wasn't anything like that. I was just tired. I was just tired and busy. And so I'd wake up and I would, because I was working two jobs and I was still doing other things on top of that, I was just always doing something. So I'd wake up and have to get dressed, change, hit the ground running, be working, get out of one job. I think I was taking the bus at that time, so I wasn't driving. So I'm running to the bus stop, getting on the bus, going to the terminal, going to the next job, getting out of there, doing it, running errands, doing things like in between. And so by the time I got home, I was just beat. And so I just went to sleep. I didn't make a big decision. And same thing when it was the at the other end of the spectrum and I was smoking all the time. It wasn't like, oh, now is our, our super 24/7 green hours only. We're smoking all the time because we can fit it into our schedule. It was just it didn't hinder me from doing any of the things that I wanted to do. And that's what I love about what you said. Like, it's about being honest. Is the hobby or is the option that you're picking right now hindering you from doing other things, personal or professional? Is it hindering you from living a life that you enjoy living? It doesn't mean that you're, skipping down the street, whistling your own theme song, like it's even though I do have moments where I feel like I wish I had a little theme song like Peter Griffin, but we're not going to make that wish. And then there are moments where I'm just like, don't look at me, I'm just going to sit in this corner and die. And I go through all of that, but it's I try to pay attention to the choices and how they all kind of dance together. And I try to pay attention to see if there's any one choice that's like hogging the stage a little bit. You know what I mean?
That's a great way to put it, of just what's taking up too much space. And yeah, like when you think about like your life as like this sort of bubble around you, and the different things that you put your time into are like little bubble, or like little, I'm imagining like different colored shapes and like they're different sizes based on how much time you're putting into all of them. And like the bubble maybe is like a limited room, like because you only have so much mental capacity, you only have so much time in a day. So like there are limits to what you can be investing your time into. Like it could be anything, but you can't do everything at once, right? So like when you see it as sort of visually like that, like what things are hogging too much space, and how can you rearrange things? How can you, deflate one bubble and inflate a different bubble so that everything feels, okay to you, and you don't feel overcrowded, and you don't feel uh like, what is it called when you're in like a tightly packed space and you get
Like,
all anxious?
oh,
What is that called?
yeah, claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia. Yeah, if you're feeling claustrophobic, maybe you need to look at what you're over investing in. And that's a great way to put it. And then once you take a step back from those things, you're like, oh, I have so much space now. I don't feel so claustrophobic. And I really like that visual. Um, and it's not a one size fits all solution. It's definitely a dynamic balance that we're constantly working on forever. And there's never going to be just like the perfect solution and lifestyle figured out. But it's a process of continually checking in with yourself and being present with the decisions that you're making, and really considering like, is this, do I need this? Like, what am I really doing this for? What is this giving me that I feel so attached to it? And how, like, what are maybe other ways that I can go about, this relationship with this thing, or, soothing whatever issue it is internally that I'm trying to look outwards to solve. Like, sometimes just looking within and realizing, oh, this is because I'm anxious about this other situation in my life, or, I have stuff emotionally that's going on. You can cope with it in a way that is more beneficial to your life as a whole. And again, that's a moment to moment process of just paying attention to how certain decisions make you feel, and nobody can tell you what that looks like. And that can be a little frustrating sometimes because you just want to know, like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Like, what do I do? Like, somebody please just tell me, how do I live a happy and fulfilled life? Wouldn't it be so nice if just somebody could tell you, okay, here are the ingredients for a happy life. Just go do that. But it's very different for every single person. So that's kind of our task while we're here existing, is to just figure out how we want to live and how we can get the most out of this experience.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, Developing that sensitivity and paying attention to your response is probably the most, or at least it's a huge place where I've learned a lot, is just paying attention to my responses. You know, things feel to some degree like there's just this infinitely wide, big table, and on the table is everything. And it sometimes feels like I'm so zoomed into a certain part of the table, and I really love it or I hate it, right? Either or something, somewhere on the spectrum, right? We're feeling some type of way about a certain part of the table. So vague. I love it. And and um and then things shift and we're focused on a different part. And it's like paying attention to my response to that movement. You know, am I overly ecstatic that things have moved? You know, and why is that? You know, why was I so bothered by the situation I was just in? Or I was having fun, quote unquote, and now I'm in a situation where I'm not having as much fun. Why not? Why am what's so different that I'm not able to enjoy it as much? So I am definitely going to pay attention to the response. And that's going to let me know what I'm holding on to. And through that, I can develop more sensitivity and 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 to see what I'm holding on to makes it a little bit easier to let it go, because I've just acknowledged that I was holding on to it. Either had a preference that was being met or it wasn't, or there was something that I was, you know, hoping for, some kind of expectation. And so I think it's really cool to be able to pay attention to your responses. And in that, you get to you get to you get to you get to see how the space is being utilized. And it seems like you have the most flexibility to go with the reorganization, right? The where we're focusing on the table moves. And as it moves, I'm feeling lighter with the movements versus feeling like I'm dragging my feet, you know, let go or be dragged. And it's in my response that I'm either dragging myself or I'm letting go. So it feels like just pay attention to your response is probably the best thing that, or it's one really helpful consideration.
Just pay attention to and not judge. It's just about being curious about how different things make you feel versus, oh my God. I was literally cleaning a table as you were talking about the table. Oh my gosh. I love how, it's as if we're all one thing. That's really crazy.
Right.
Imagine that. Um, but yeah, it's either you can be curious and in tune with the experience you're having, or you could be trying to figure it out and judge whether what's changing was a good change or a bad change. Um, that's something I can struggle with, because I just want to understand where I'm at. And I think that's something we all, you know, reckon with. Like our brains are just sort of designed to try and figure things out. And that's why we separate things into different objects and concepts, because they're easier to wrap our brains around than this like messy gray area. Um, but I love that, like paying attention to your reactions and not validating them, but just being curious about, oh, like I am bothered by this change. Like, what is it that I was holding on to in the last situation? Why did I think I needed that? And then recognizing, oh, yeah, I'm still okay. Um, everything is constantly changing all the time. So, like, as long as I'm still here, I'm good. And I've learned from whatever that situation was, whether I enjoyed that change or I didn't, I enjoyed that experience or not. Like, it's still informing how I move through the world for the rest of my life. And I think, I don't know, I just find so much symbolism with my yoga practice too, because um, when you're like paying attention to your reactions, I think about paying attention to like the transitions between yoga poses and like whether I feel more relief or I feel stressed out when I move into a different pose. Um, and it's not about figuring out whether I'm doing the transition or the pose right or wrong and how it looks from the outside, but it's like, okay, I'm noticing these sensations popping up, building up that sensitivity, like you mentioned, and then how can I support myself? You know, maybe I grab a yoga block, maybe I put a blanket under my knees, maybe I deepen my breath, maybe I have to do a modification, or maybe I just don't move into that pose entirely because like it's just not working for me. And I think that's sort of the process we go through in every decision and change that we go through in our lives is like we enter a new situation, we get this input, and then from there we can decide how we want to navigate. Um, but it's about how things feel. It's not about what we should be doing. And I think that's where we can be led into these places of like extreme anxiety or just like feeling discombobulated or out of touch with ourselves is when we make decisions based on how we think we should be living or from like the idea of ourselves in our lives rather than the experience of ourselves in our lives. Um, and that is a moment to moment process and it's very nuanced, and sometimes you try things and you make an adjustment and you're like no, never mind, and you can always change and pivot. So we're just constantly in this process, and that's why my name is Process today. I guess like we're just constantly in this process of um, negotiating different things and um, you know, seeing what different experiences are like and making new decisions and gaining context because of it. And there's no endpoint to that. And there's no real way to measure how you're doing. It's just something that we're stuck with forever, but it becomes a little bit more of a fun dance the less you're taking it seriously and the less you're fixating on endpoints.
Absolutely. It's the less seriously you take things, the lighter it feels, because there you don't have that weight. You know, the seriousness usually comes from the weight of your judgment that you should be doing things differently. And when we're paying attention to, the pivots and the decisions and how we feel about them, we get to learn a lot about the limitations that we have about ourselves. Something all of a sudden pops up and you're like, fuck. It's like all of a sudden in 1 second you thought, I don't know if I can handle this, and so you're like, you hesitate. And I wonder if that judgment, that self-judgment that you can't handle it, is the driving force behind hesitation, like as a whole, right? Like I can't think of any example where I have hesitated and it was because of anything other than I thought I couldn't handle it. Like I'm really.
Or it's like I'm afraid of my physical well-being, but I guess that is another thing of like I don't think I can handle that.
Right. It's like a on the branch on the tree.
Mhm.
I can't handle it. Is the physical. There's like a physical.
That's like physical safety, like competency at a certain skill.
That's
Like
right. I tell bad jokes over here.
like I can't handle people's rejection over here. You know, I'm afraid of people's reactions.
Right, right. Yeah, there's definitely a limit of that. There's definitely, oh my goodness. But seriously, just that hesitation comes from a judgment, a snap judgment that I can't handle this, and so I need to come up with a way to handle it. I need to come up with the perfect thing to say. I need to come up with the next best choice. And I think, or at least I what comes to mind is just the times where it has felt like I was flying high, are the moments where I was winging it, where I was just the process and not the destination, the end goal. It wasn't a means to an end. It was like I was the decision making process. I was just making choices and not thinking about how I was making that choice, if it was the right choice. It was just like off the cuff, bam. This is a showdown decision, yes or no, bang bang. You know. And sometimes it does feel that high stakes, but it's usually not. Usually it's just that we panic, and that panic feels like a life or death kind of feeling, but it's not. And we can handle so much more than we imagine. And so I've been challenging myself, and reminding myself, I'm like, if I'm nervous about the worst case scenario happen, it's good for me to tell myself that the best case scenario, quote unquote, is just as likely to happen, right? And what I'm worried about is usually a hypothetical. But if one hypothetical is true, so is the other. So is the full spectrum of those hypotheticals. And so instead of imagining just the hypotheticals, I can just jump in and and then see what happens versus just seeing how I'm responding to what I think will happen. Because damn, that imagination is so powerful. It cracks me up because people sometimes, or the way that it view our society kind of views like intellect, like academic intellectual prowess, is that it's so superior, but our imaginations are so powerful, and that has nothing to do with facts.
Yeah, they can be quite convincing at times. Um, but I don't think hesitation or overthinking any choice has really made things better or easier or more efficient. And I love like thinking about the fact that usually the first answer that comes to mind is more likely to be correct than like the one that we sit there and ponder over, because we can kind of get in our way. Like I think about back when I would take tests in high school, and I'd be stuck on a question, and I had like the first answer that I thought to be true, and then I questioned myself, and then I ended up choosing the wrong answer, and then I get the test back, and I'm like, dang, I should have just gone with my gut. And I think we're a lot more intelligent and competent, like you said, than we give ourselves credit for. And we we think that every single choice that we make has to be the quote unquote right one, but the way that we're thinking about it is from a very like logical way of making a decision. And sometimes you don't really need logic. Like sometimes your gut feeling is and it is a type of intelligence, but it's not one that we really understand. So I think we're less inclined to trust it. But the times that you do, you're like, most of the time, I'm surprised with how like on point it is. Even like with gut feelings about people or situations. And I'll be like, no, like they seem like a nice person. And this seems like a good decision for me based on like how I see myself and where my life is going. But sometimes you'll just have that gut feeling of like, something is up here. And uh like the times that I really haven't trusted my gut, I've come to regret it. most of the time because I was like, damn, I knew it. And it's not that. It's without fail because, you know, anything can happen, you know, and it's not that we can predict the future by listening to our gut, but but um I do think it's something that we can trust more so than we do currently. And like, it's also when we make decisions through logic, there's no guarantee that that's going to work out in the way that we expect it to either. So, um, it's kind of just like being open to acting and seeing what happens rather than trying to live and figure everything out in your mind, which I've built a habit of doing for sure, of, you know, prospecting in my mind and making all these fucking assumptions and imagining hypothetical outcomes, and then, you know, realizing, oh yeah, like all of this work that I'm doing in my mind isn't fucking doing anything, and it's not necessarily based in reality, and it comes to a point where you're gonna have to act anyway, so might as well save yourself the time and the anguish and just act, and then you get a response, and then you can actually do something with that. But nothing actually is being figured out by thinking about it. It's just running in place. So exhausting.
I know. We're hitting the gas and the car is parked. We're going nowhere, people. But the car rumbles and it feels like something is happening because you're in the car, you're hitting the gas and you're hearing the engine, it's revving up and the car is shaking and you've got the windows open, you're feeling the air, but you're not going anywhere despite how busy that moment feels. Um, but if I'm possibly, you know, not not honest, then I'm, or I guess, yeah, that's pretty much it. If I'm not honest with myself, I'm never gonna leave the driveway, and then it shouldn't be a surprise that I'm seeing the same scene, for the most part, or it shouldn't be a surprise that I'm not moving when I'm, you know, doing everything from park into drive. I'm changing the windshield wipers. I'm adjusting the mirrors. I'm putting on and unbuckling the seatbelt. I'm changing the heat. I'm putting the radio on. I'm looking for CDs. I'm like, okay, all right, we're gonna drive. You gotta have the right CD. Can't drive without the right CD. I'm doing everything but putting the fucking car in drive. That's what my life feels like sometimes. Um, but then when I see that and I'm like, the stick shift is got cobwebs on it. I'm like, oh God, it's been ages since we've touched that thing. Let's clean that baby up and let's just go. And you figure things out kind of like as they unfold. So I'm so glad that there are moments where I am, afraid to put the car in drive, and there are times where I feel like I couldn't imagine parking again. But both of those things have their own beauty and their own appreciation, because I've had so many beautiful moments where I've just parked my actual car from before, and and just was contently sitting there parked enjoying a sunset or something like that. And there are times where I went on like a 10-hour car drive, and I barely pulled over. I was like, I am on an adventure and I'm loving it. I'm on the road, and I appreciate those moments, because I'm usually in a different mindset when I'm enjoying one of those. But if I'm rushing to drive because I'm so scared to park, or if I'm so scared to drive because it feels safe to park, both of those things are driving from that same fear that I can't handle myself on the road, or that there's something wrong with me if I'm parking for too long. And nothing means anything. It's never what I think. And that was one of the big things that I took from the Denver retreat, was just that it's not as bad as I think, because it's not what I think. And despite how real my hypotheticals can feel, that's not the reality. And so I'm never gonna experience, I can't say I'll never know, but I'll never find out. I'll never be able to find out what the experience could be if I don't just either pay attention and park when it feels like it makes sense and drive when it feels like that's what I would like to do without needing to get anywhere in particular, whether I'm in motion or technically still. So it's been really cool to just remind myself that it's just not what I think, even if I really want it to be.
Yeah, just take the pressure off. And I like that you said you made that distinction of like the fear doesn't just keep us in park, it could also keep us driving when we're, falling asleep at the wheel.
Right,
And
right.
we need to pull over, right? Or, you really have to pee, like, or you're hungry, there's reasons that we have to slow down and we need to
Yeah,
stop. Um, and yeah, just not making the assumption that you know what's best allows you to tune into the sensitivity of like, it makes sense to drive right now. It makes sense to park right now. And the less weight you put on either decision, either way, because it doesn't mean anything about you, like the more aligned with just like the natural flow of things that you can become. And like you become less inhibited um, from, doing either thing. And sometimes we think like putting the pressure on is the only way to, be productive and get further. But sometimes taking a break and then continuing to go is a better way of um like giving yourself longevity, because if you just go all gas no brakes, you know you can burn yourself out really easily. And um that's that's not what we want either. Like if we're trying to, you know start a project that we've been putting off, for example, um yeah, the pressure is either going to cause you to avoid, or it could cause you to go too hard and burn yourself out, or have that thing be like all consuming in your life and then other things kind of fall to the wayside, whether about that be like your health, your relationships, other things that we need to like have a well balanced healthy life. um, so it really just comes down to that sensitivity. And in order to listen to that sensitivity, you have to throw the ideas out the window. You don't fucking know what's best or what's actually happening. The idea of what you think is happening is never the reality of what is actually happening. And I think we can just live in our heads for so much of our lives, and it doesn't go anywhere. So I love this metaphor. It's actually very appropriate. And like if you want to have a enjoyable and you want to go the distance on your road trip, you got to take some breaks. You got to stop for gas, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you failed at your mission because you didn't just go from point A to point B as fast as possible. Like there is room for the ebb and flow you know of participating and surrendering. And that's something we're constantly navigating.
absolutely. We are constantly navigating it, and you know, paying attention to the car, the driver, the road, the gas attendants when you are stopping to get gas. Like, don't be so aggressive. Don't be so first thing that comes to mind is just don't be so hard on yourself, right? Don't judge your progress. Don't judge the number of miles you've driven in a row, and don't judge the number of minutes for every stop. You're it's going to be case by case. And so it's very much just trying to pay attention as best as you can, knowing that things are going to fall through the cracks. Guys, let's not put too much pressure on ourselves. Like, we're going to notice things, we're going to not notice things. And as we begin to notice the things we don't notice, we get better at noticing. And isn't that so funny? Like, it's in my quote unquote missteps. It's in my fuck ups where I get to see where I didn't make a certain consideration. And then I don't want to forget that I didn't make that consideration. I don't want to forget that, yeah, I was a dick to the gas attendant. I was really unnecessarily dickish, and it's because I was rushing, because I thought that I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible, right? For this car analogy example, for this road trip example, and I didn't. I'm gonna get to wherever I'm gonna get, whenever I get there, right? What are we gonna do? What are we really gonna shave off by being rude to the people on the journey? What am I shaving? 2, 3, 4 minutes? What are you gonna do with all that time, Amanda? And it's like we rush for crumbs. What? Like I'm going to I'm going to appreciate the times where I wasn't making a certain consideration, where I did take things too seriously, where I didn't stop for gas or for the bathroom, and I'm going to remember the ripple and the consequence of not making those considerations, and then that's going to be a great like, that's going to add momentum to making that missed consideration in the future, is because you remember the ripple from not making it, and you're like, okay, well, I sped out of the gas station and I got a speeding ticket. Not worth it. I'm gonna take my time next time. Damn the GPS, ETA that told me the 130, and now it's gonna be 132. It's like, it's 132 now. So be it. We're gonna get there, and when we arrive, we'll have so much more space to appreciate the arrival, right? Not just getting there. So I have been loving this analogy, and we have been chewing it up, Jackie.
Yeah. And I guess just like closing thought, put a bow on this one, is like going on a road trip is not about getting to the destination. It's about the experience of the trip, right? And like when we're fixated on, how long we're stopping for and how consistently we're pushing forward and how many miles we're driving in a row and trying to measure our progress, we're missing the views. We're missing the tunes. We're missing the conversations we're having with our friend in the car next to us, and that's what it's actually about. And like we can appreciate all of the chapters of our lives and the times where we're hesitating maybe and pussyfooting around. Like, there's something to be appreciated about that. And like your willingness to just be at peace with where you are, that's something to appreciate as well. And then, when you do have periods of being super involved, like there's something to be appreciated about that too. And you can't really see that as much when you're just, inflating your ego and be like, yeah, I'm doing the best. Like you're like putting yourself on a pedestal and you're not like actually feeling out that experience. Um, so I guess that's just the final thought, is like the more you're focused on the experience and taking your time, because it's not about where you get or how quickly you get there, because all of that is just like, it's not a real thing to hold on to. Like, it's not the reality of your experience. It's rooted in the idea of your experience, which is never actually certain. So yeah, enjoy the ride today, you guys, and every day. This has been a blast. Thank thank you all for joining us in the comments. Been really enjoying reading them. And to everyone listening after the fact, shout out to you. And we love doing this. We'll be back next Friday for another episode of Do You Real? And yeah, anything else we got to plug, Amanda?
Well, I'm excited to see you in Port Alberni for the in the November retreat, and I think that starts November 2nd. The details are available for our Patreon members. So I did put it the QR code to become a Patreon member if you're not already. If you are, check out some posts because I believe it is accessible to all 3 tiers at this point. If not, tier 1 will get it this Sunday, access this Sunday. So is it this Sunday? No, actually, tier 2 gets access this Sunday, and then tier 3 gets access next Sunday. And then I think it's available for the public for June 30th. But I don't know if the tickets are going to last that long. So I definitely wanted to do a quick plug for Port Alberni. Jackie will be teaching some yoga classes there, and there'll be massage therapists, a classically trained musician performing, and a chef making all of our meals. The location is marvelous, Jackie. I cannot wait for you to get there and enjoy it. And yeah, that's the only quick plug I wanted to make. And thank you so much, everyone. And I couldn't agree more, Jackie. Enjoy the ride, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you again next Friday for another episode of Do You Real at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Bye.